As we celebrated the birth of America last weekend, many of us reflected on the complicated history of this nation. This is mirrored by a complicated history of the Presbyterian Church. As we know, Presbyterians were signers of the Declaration of Independence, and many aspects of Presbyterian governance were worked into our nation's laws and policies. So today we are talking about history, specifically Presbyterian history. I am honored to welcome Sonia Prescott, a public services associate with the Presbyterian Historical Society in Philadelphia. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thanks for having me. So I was asked to give a little bit of a short intro about the Presbyterian Historical Society. So I'll just say that the Presbyterian Historical Society is the oldest continuously running denominational historical society. We are also one of the largest. Our full holdings span an entire city block. I know that Maryland isn't too far from Philadelphia. So if once, things change with the restrictions, if folks want to come and see our archives in person, we do welcome that. Our official mission is we are in charge of collecting, preserving, and sharing the story of the American Presbyterian experience. That's our central mission.
Wow. Honestly, that seems so broad. So can you give us some examples of what falls under that would actually fulfill that mission?
Sure. So as the official denominational archive, we hold records from every level of the entire denomination. So when you think about different administrative tasks like the Office of the General Assembly, we have records of the Office of the General Assembly. We also have records of the Presbyterian Mission Agency, of just various parts of the church, from the top all the way down to synods, presbyteries, and finally on the congregation level. So the records that we hold for congregations are from congregations all over the United States, as well as Puerto Rico, and as well as just kind of any Presbyterian congregations across the world. And the records that we hold are session records, trustees minutes, all kinds of things that are created by congregations. And so that's why our archive is very large now and is always continuously expanding.
Wow. Thinking about the logistics and the space, I know we would be able to visit at some point, when things are a bit better in the pandemic. In terms of the Presbyterian Historical Society, have you had to move locations, or are you able to have kind of maintain that original building and archive and just built onto it over the years?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. So the Presbyterian Historical Society was founded in 1852. Our original location was in an office building within the Board of Pensions in Center City, Philadelphia. And we were just kind of one floor within that major skyscraper building. And if you ever get a chance to visit the Presbyterian Historical Society, you'll see in front of our building, we have statues of some major figures from Presbyterian history, including Samuel Davies, including Marcus Whitman, and of course, John Witherspoon. These statues were designed to sit at the front of the building. And so they are very large and very intimidating when they are right in front of you. But those are currently in front of our current location at 425 Lombard Street. But they were designed as part of the outside structure of our office in Center City. So we went from that one floor in the office building to having our own full city block worth of records. And we also now have holdings that are in off-site storage as well.
How do you rotate items if somebody wanted to visit, if looking for a specific item or just kind of getting general information?
One of the things that we do is, because I work in public services, we have to be very mindful about what records are being used the most often, so we know what can be moved offsite and what can, needs to stay in the building. And so one of the things that we kind of keep track of on a daily, weekly, and even a monthly basis is what questions are people asking? How long is it taking us to answer those questions? What can we do to make sure that we're best serving our patrons who are the Presbyterian public? and the public in general. And so we try to keep track of all of that so that we know what we can do to best serve.
Have you seen an uptick in activity of people within the church or outside of it researching their family trees due to maybe the increased popularity of things like Ancestry.com and 23andMe?
You know, one of the interesting things about my job that I really enjoy is the amount of genealogy research that we help folks with. And I would say I haven't noticed an uptick, but only because it's a huge part of what we do in general. So it's just always been there. The nice thing about Ancestry.com and 23andMe, but definitely Ancestry.com, is that it makes some of our records even more accessible to the public. So a number of our congregation records have actually been digitized by Ancestry.com and are available and fully searchable on Ancestry.com's website. And so that does make our jobs a little bit easier. And so that's one of the things I appreciate about those type of services.
So that's really interesting, that relationship that you guys have with Ancestry.com. Do you have similar relationships with other websites or organizations that do some of the genealogical work?
Ancestry.com is probably the largest one that we've done this with. We're also kind of in the process of talking to other organizations that are interested in doing this type of work. But, you know, as the custodians of these records, we are mindful of which organizations we work with, how they will be using these records, and whether or not these records will be fully accessible to the people who should have access to them, which is the Presbyterian community. So those are all kind of considerations that we take in, that all things that we consider when we think about what other organizations we might partner with.
That is so fascinating, and really, I hope that people kind of take that and start doing a little research now through those websites if they are not able to speak to either the Presbyterian Historical Society or, again, come out to visit. So one of the things about Ark and Dove is we named a room in our building after the Presbyterian pastor, John Witherspoon. Could you please give us a basic biography on him and, you know, explain why he's considered a prominent Presbyterian?
John Witherspoon was a Scottish-American Presbyterian minister who sailed from Scotland to America in 1768 to become president of what was then a small, struggling college that would eventually become Princeton University. He was one of 12 Presbyterians to sign the Declaration of Independence. He was the only active clergyman. And these are some of the reasons why he's considered a prominent figure in Presbyterian history.
So he signed the Declaration, I guess considering him a founding father, that he was also an educator. And it looks like he taught about moral philosophy from some of the research we've seen. Yet he also owned slaves and was against the abolition of slavery as an institution. How did he justify that dichotomy?
That was an interesting question to consider. I mean, and it's one that we've started to think about even when we talk about him. And I mean, we have a statue of him in front of the building. And so it's something that we've had to consider. And, you know, what's interesting when you look at John Witherspoon is that distinction between someone who did great things versus someone who necessarily was a great person, right? John Witherspoon, from looking back on his own words and his own writings, was a supporter of slavery, had no moral qualms with supporting slavery, and in fact, there were points where he said that where he made it clear that he was a proponent of it and would not support abolition of slavery. And in fact, he never, unlike some others, he never decided to free or put manumission into his will. So the people that were enslaved by him and by his family continued to be enslaved even after he passed on. And so I think that for him, honestly, I think his justification of what he did was that I think he saw African Americans as less deserving of freedom than others. And, you know, I think that is one of the reasons why a lot of institutions, including Princeton, have started to reconsider his legacy and his, you know, how we view him.
Wow. Always complicated, as we were saying earlier.
You know, one of the things that I just wanted to mention about John Witherspoon specifically is occasionally when we look back at figures like this, folks try to absolve people by saying that they were a man of their times. Oh, well, this was the common practice. So, you know, and there's kind of some moral absolution there. And what I want to make clear is that in 1787, the main ruling body of the Presbyterian Church in America drew national and international attention when it recommended that members of the church do everything in their power to promote the abolition of slavery and the instruction of Negroes, whether bond or free. And so this is what people were saying and thinking in his time. And so, you know, there's no justification of like absolving him and saying, oh, this is just what people were doing then. No, there were people who knew better and who were within the Presbyterian Church who spoke out against slavery.
Wow, thank you so much for making that point, and sharing that additional layer of history, because you're right that we are very quick to dismiss the past in this way, but not looking at the full history of the past in those times. So understanding that he was basically at odds with the larger body is really important, kind of disheartening, but I am really glad that we can give more of that context to our viewers. So another prominent historical figure in our denomination is John Gloucester. Can you give us a little bit of his background?
Sure. So he was the first African-American ordained Presbyterian minister in the United States and the founder of First African Presbyterian Church in Philadelphia. First African Presbyterian Church was the oldest African-American, or is the oldest African-American Presbyterian church in the United States. John Gloucester was born into slavery in 1776, but was purchased and freed in 1806 by the Reverend Gideon Blackburn. Reverend Blackburn noticed that John Gloucester had this aptitude and this love for preaching, and was himself involved in converting a number of enslaved persons to Christianity. And so Reverend Gideon Blackburn saw this and decided that he was going to purchase him and free him, and then try to help him to become ordained, which eventually happened. Reverend Blackburn taught him theology, and then his theological education continued when he attended a school in Tennessee. And eventually he was given a license to preach among African Americans by the Union Synod of Tennessee. By 1807, he was preaching in Philadelphia at the First African Presbyterian Church, which he helped to found. And he was preaching to a congregation of 123 people at that time. And he was eventually ordained in 1810 and would continue to minister to folks at First African PC until his death in 1822. So of note about his life and about his kind of historical significance, from 1815 to 1822, he was the mentor of Samuel Cornish, an early African-American Presbyterian minister who organized the first congregation of Black Presbyterians in New York. Of his 5 children, 4 would go on to become Presbyterian ministers themselves, and 3 formed their own congregations. So from this one man, we have all of these great Presbyterian connections that developed within Philadelphia, within New York. So he was kind of the start of a lot of these Black Presbyterian communities in Philadelphia and New York.
So it sounds like, for what you were saying, that his church is still in existence in Philadelphia.
Due to a decline in membership, First African Presbyterian Church did decide to merge with 3 other churches to form what is now called New River Presbyterian Church in Philadelphia. It is still recognized as one of the great historic churches, congregations of Philadelphia. And so that's why they decided that they wanted to merge with these other congregations to keep it going and keep the history and the story alive of First African PC. And we still have a number of records, even artifacts from those original old founding days of First African PC that are within our holdings at at the Presbyterian Historical Society.
So I know you mentioned they have their own great history. Is there any additional historical information about this particular church that you would like to share?
One of the things I would say about First African PC specifically was just that because it is the oldest, founded in 1807 in Philadelphia, it was for a very long time considered to be kind of the place to go to church if you were kind of an up and coming African-American middle class, upper middle class. And so that was one of the really nice things, is that if you look at the evolution of the Black middle class in Philadelphia, there are a number of people who were famous figures who attended First African PC. And what I always really liked about the church as well is that despite having a congregation that was always working on being up and coming, they were always focused on giving back as they move forward. So they had a number of outreach services. They did a number of different things. The entire history of the church has always been about service to the larger community. And that's, something that I think is really beautiful, that's continued on even to this day.
That community piece is so important, that it sounds like they are really not just invested in how they are a part of their community, but really doing things that work and integrate with their community. So it's not just, oh, we're here and you can come by if you want to, but that they are in a lot of those spaces, that they're building those relationships, that people are coming to them as well as them going out into the wider world around them. And it sounds like that, even though they have merged, that continues with these three congregations coming together to continue being strong community members and examples within the faith. So my mind is just reeling with information, and I feel like I need to make a visit to this historical society.
We have kind of a massive collection of records, but that we are always continuing to grow. And two parts of that is the African American Leaders and Congregations Collecting Initiative, which is essentially an initiative that we developed once we reviewed our collections and our holdings and said, you know what, there just isn't enough representation of the Black Presbyterian experience within our holdings. And so we're going to make a concerted effort to put staff and resources behind bringing in more of those records and telling more of that story. And so that's something that we're focused on right now. We also have the Pam Byers Memorial Collection, which is dedicated to documenting all sides and perspectives on the 40-year movement for gay ordination and LGBTQ marriage rights within the church. And so those two parts of our holdings are continuing to develop, and we're always welcoming in more records related to the Black Presbyterian experience, as well as the LGBTQIA plus Presbyterian experience as well. And that's just a part of us continuing to look to the past, but also look to the future.
That is amazing work. Like you said, this is an initiative you're working on right now, but have there already been conversations about what that next level might be with other maybe marginalized groups or other underrepresented groups within the current information?
Well, I think that that's something that we're always trying to be mindful of. But I think a big part of that is feedback from our patrons, from our community, because, for example, I had a conversation with a person who was calling to find information about a Korean American Presbyterian congregation. And she said, my church has been in existence for 100 years. And we're calling to find out what records you may have, because we're getting ready to do an anniversary celebration. And, I was sad to say that we didn't have any records of that particular congregation. But what I said was, I know you all are working together to put together this anniversary celebration. Can you please send us anything that you have from that celebration? And if you would like to potentially talk to congregation members or other folks who know the history of the church and would like to do maybe an oral history, let us know, and we'd be happy to help with that as well. And so that's kind of the thing that we're trying to do, of just being mindful of the gaps that we have, but also trying to make sure we continue to build this connection with our congregation members, who are the backbone of the historical society. I mean, the congregations know more than we do what might not be there, and they are the ones who can kind of alert us and keep us in the loop.
So how would someone go about, I guess, contacting the Presbyterian Historical Society to offer information, or to even check in to see if it's the sort of information that would be appropriate to the archive?
Our contact information is readily available on our website. You can give us a call anytime. We also have on our website our official contact information for the public services staff, which is refdesk@history.pcusa.org. And one of the things I wanted to make sure that I do is I'm going to try to send, not too soon after this, I would like to send some information that you all can pass along to your to the church, that just kind of gives some sources for the information that I've already spoken about related to John Witherspoon and John Gloucester, but as well as information, just useful information about the Historical Society.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for, I would say, in advance for that.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Sonia, for coming on the lobby and giving us so much information about our forebears and about the Presbyterian Historical Society.